We're back. And now we have a milestone issue that we're going to discuss with Action Comics number 975 and the big reveal, who is Clark Kent.
Mm-hmm.
And before that, Superwoman number 8 is a tie-in with this whole Superman Reborn, but it's kind of, there's some hints, and I will say there's some hints that are laid in there. I don't think we're fully going to understand until the Superman Reborn arc gets done.
Mm-hmm.
So with that being said, we're going to discuss what we feel it kind of happened with Superwoman. Then we're going to get right into Action Comics because that's the big issue this week. That's the sweet tooth. That's the candy. So we have the family, friends, and we have candy. Superwoman number 8, By a Thread, Superwoman Reborn. Let's talk about what we do know. When New 52 Superman blew up, disintegrated, the Lois Lane and Lana Lang, Lois Lane, Lana Lang, LLLL, they absorbed the energy from New 52 Superman. We saw that it disintegrated Lois Lane, and now it looks like that this energy is taking its toll on Lana. As we saw in previous issues, she was dying because of this. So Superman, our rebirth Superman, had taken her and John Henry Irons' steel to a fortress and put her in a Kryptonian armor, which has regeneration. While she's in there, she begins to have, if you want to call it hallucinations, or she's kind of dreaming, seeing New 52 Superman, Lois, her brother, and a few other members of her family.
Dad, a lot of people from her life.
And she's fighting off her anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all about getting stuff that's been on her mind and off her chest, just literally thinking it out. But what we also see is she has this discussion with Clark Kent and Lois Lane, and they say, thank you for protecting our essence, really, this energy, our essence.
Mm-hmm.
And she's like, what are you talking about? And they say, you protected our son. They make some very kind of confusing, it is confusing, but we know that basically what Lana Lang is doing is she's coming to terms with her anxiety and with her grief.
Mm-hmm.
And this energy, I don't know what's going to happen when she releases it. She thinks that she's all right, but she's still kind of comatose.
Yeah. She goes through a lot of stages in this dream or hallucination where she's, she's dealing with what she thinks is her family and her friends being disappointed in her. She's lashing out at them for all sorts of different things, lashing out at Lois for getting, killed off just a few issues in. She's getting, yelling at Superman for, blowing up in front of her and bathing her in energy that's killing her. And then she goes into sort of the, okay, I understand it now phase where, she's talking to them. They're reminiscing about, her and Lois reminisce about being Superwoman red and blue. And then finally in the end, after in her dream, she's, she gives them all the energy back. And that, turns Lois back into Super Lois and they all fly off. And then in the end, and she wakes up on a couch next to John Henry Irons. And they say, there's a fire in the port. We need to go. We all need to go suit up. And it's her and Steele and Natasha and the entire family. It's her coming to terms with that family. Because throughout this issue, too, she looks at Steele, and who's, he's kind of keeping vigil over her in the Fortress of Solitude and says, God, why don't I love him the way I love you, Clark?
Yep.
Why am I not in love with him as much as I'm in love with you?
Yeah.
And of course that falls on Lois too, but she's also finally accepting the fact, look, I love this guy, even if the man of my dreams, Clark Kent, Kal-El, he's out of the picture.
But it's worth noting that her happy ending with John Henry Irons on the couch and that's still in her dream. She's still comatose and John Henry Irons is still looking after her. So I'm not sure where that all happens.
Feels like it might be something that might happen afterwards. Once she gets out of there, she might have that kind of
I don't
epiphany.
know. I think it was still her dream.
Yeah.
I still think it was part of her dream.
I think that's kind of preparing her for after she gets out. Yeah, I was kind of expecting her to pop out at the end and say, "Hey, Steele, how are you?" No, she's still in there.
Let's talk about what definitely did happen in this issue. Atomic Skull kind of got an offer to join the
Special Crimes Unit. Yeah.
Special Crimes Unit. That was very interesting. Lex Luthor kind of confronts Lena one last time and puts her away.
Yeah.
Still saying he's looking for a cure, and she's not having any of that.
Yeah, well, and with a very interesting explanation from Lena about, I picked this form with kind of the, the modified war suit because this is what you've always wanted. This is what you think is power and strength, and this is what people are supposed to look like.
Yes.
And Lex is kind of horrified at that, and and very slowly locks her, sends her into this cube down the hall. Like, I'll fix you at some point.
Exactly.
And, yeah.
There's no fixing. I'm curious on what will happen with Superwoman after this Superman Reborn. And there's some story arcs that I don't know if this will be the end of Superwoman series, but I definitely think it's going to take a major turn.
Yeah. I hope they keep Lana as Superwoman, because that's a really different vibe, too. And to keep her and Steel, it's cool. It has a lot of possibility. It's just, you got to figure out why she's dying and stop her from dying.
Let's go to a major clue of what's going on. Action Comics number 975. Superman Reborn Part 2 / we'll wait on the second part. Well, Clark Kent, after the issue of Jonathan, we didn't cover that, Jonathan disappearing in the blue flames, Superman and Lois Lane go to the person that was responsible, Clark Kent's apartment. They go in there, and they don't see Clark Kent, but they open up the drawers, they open up the refrigerator, and it's full of junk food, candy, junk food, anything a kid would like. So I was thinking, okay, this is a very interesting person who this Clark Kent is. Clark comes out and says, well, you forgot about me. You forgot. Who am I? Well, was he Lex Luthor?
Nope.
Was he Cyborg Superman?
Nope.
Was he Doomsday?
Surprisingly, no.
Was he Bizarro?
I would have loved to have seen that work, but
was he Mongol? Who was he? And why were we seeing, as this was going on, why was all this candy in the background? Who was this person with the sweet tooth?
Drumroll, please. It was Mr. Mxyzptlk.
Mr. who?
Mr. Mxyzptlk, the imp from the fifth dimension.
Of all the people that it could be, what was his motivation? We didn't see this coming at all.
No. This was something that, a couple weeks ago when Tom gets these comics through email, and he said he'd read it, and I asked him, well, don't spoil it for me, but is it good? Is it bad? What's your reaction? And he said, it's different. You wouldn't expect it.
It is different because this is a character that is mischievous, and so I guess that would be why he was kind of smart-alecky. I thought it was Superman or Superboy Prime just because when I saw the drawings, I thought maybe it was Superboy, but it turned out to be Superman. It wasn't Superman; it was Mxyzptlk.
It also makes sense too because he had kind of the car with no driver, and disappearing when he went to go into his apartment. It gave him some of those magical powers.
Right. The story arc is basically where it's revealed to be Mxyzptlk. He is upset because Superman forgot about him, and he kind of considered Superman and him a family. So the only way to get back at him is to make Superman and Lois forget about their family named Jonathan. So we know that Mxyzptlk is the one that took Jonathan, and now that Mxyzptlk is back, he wants Superman to remember him. He wants him to play games, and he said he was going to erase Jonathan from existence. So at the very end, Lois is why Superman? Why are we in Clark Kent's apartment in Jonathan Who?
Yeah.
So we already put a magic spell. But that doesn't explain how Mxyzptlk became Clark Kent. Well, we're going to find out because this is a special anniversary issue, double-sized, and the second part of the story was called the Man in the Purple Hat. And this is where Mxyzptlk and Jonathan are in kind of the fifth dimension or in a dimension. And Mxyzptlk explains to Jonathan what the connection is and what he had to do. And I'll let you talk about this one.
Yeah. So, not that long before, Mxyzptlk had poofed back into the DC universe. He was ready for his, every 90 days he would get to go after Superman. And so he comes back and he's all ready to take him out. And right as he shows up, he gets teleported away by Oz.
Yes.
And he's in one of those cells. And he doesn't really know why he's there. And Oz even greets him while he's there and says, look, you are basically an agent of chaos in the Superman universe. Superman's little sphere, you're a wild card. And he says, I've laid out a lot of different events that have to happen in one particular order. You're going to screw up that order. So I'm taking you, he calls it, off the table.
Yes.
And he even says, I might not even put you back on the table after this. So he really doesn't like Mr. Mxyzptlk.
No.
And Mixie, it's fun reading his reaction to that. Because he's just fiery and feisty, and he says, look, Superman's going to come for me. I've got my references his hot girlfriend and Batmite, who he just calls that weird guy in the Batman costume. They're going to come looking for me. And Oz says, look, that's the fifth dimension. It's going to be 2,000 years before they even realize you're gone.
Yep.
And so he just kind of sits there and says, look, Superman's going to save me any minute. He's going to come looking for me. He's already scanning around Metropolis looking for me because he knows, that so many days are up, and that doesn't happen.
No.
And he just sits there.
and marks the time off, the minutes, and he's getting very crazy. He is upset because he says, Superman must have forgotten me. And he was very hurt that Superman was going to forget him. But what's really cool is, going back to the story, is Jonathan called him Purple Tat. And Purple Tat. And it's like
Ruppel Tat.
Ruppel Tat, yes. And Mitchell that was the name. My dad always told me stories about you, bedtime stories. And I couldn't say Purple Hat, so I called you Purple Tat. And it just stuck with, so as I got older, instead of calling you Purple Hat, I called you Purple Tat, and it just stuck with you. I was saying this for a reason. And Mxyzptlk kind of got teared up by it.
Yeah. They kind of don't really bond a whole lot, he and John. They kind of have that understanding for one another. But Mxyzptlk's not really that friendly to John. He's still very much a captive there, even if Mxyzptlk doesn't necessarily treat him like that.
And Mxyzptlk explains, I love this part, was the bond, this thing between your dad and I goes beyond dimensions, coloring books, toys. And he's like, what do you mean? He says,
the animated series.
Yeah, they show that. I love that.
John says, what animated series?
He says, you got to understand, this is fifth dimension. What is real life to you is a coloring book for someone else. And I understand the whole, he understands everything about it being from fifth dimension. That was going to play something a little bit later. The story is, I understand the bigger picture. And when he was talking to Jonathan, he just said, hey, finally, I didn't want to play anymore. I didn't want to be in this, so I said my name backwards. Kimpleskip, whatever you say it. And the energy kind of was very powerful, and he figured, well, this is so powerful, he might be able to get out of the cell.
Yep, and it's worth noting, too, that's what Superman normally tricks him into saying to get him back to the fifth dimension. So
But Mxyzptlk says he just plays along with that.
Yeah. But he tries to use that just to get him out of that cell. And it does make a big hole in the wall. So then he makes, he does a bunch more heads and has them all say that. And,
then he gets out. And then once he gets back to Metropolis, Oz is coming back after him. The energy from Oz come back after him. So he says the only way to do that is to hide. And he hides as the only person he could as Clark Kent. which is kind of weird on why he did that. And then he said he had to convince himself that he was Clark Kent, so he whammied a spell that just kind of made him think he was Clark Kent from the memories, everything, down to last detail. But there were still little gaps that he couldn't figure out with this new Superman, this new 52 Superman. And so when he finally remembered, his powers came rushing back to him, and then he remembered who he was, and he had to make Superman pay for forgetting him. And that's where he says, now it's time to play. There's one room here, there's one door that will take you home. And if you say the magic word, I'll let you go home. So Jonathan was going to say Kimpelskin, but he stops himself and says Tetapot, or whatever the word is, Purple-tat backwards. And he's like, oh, I knew I gave you some hints. He went home. But he couldn't stay home because Mxyzptlk says, I never said that. That's part of the game.
Yeah.
And through that, Jonathan kind of realized, well, these childhood stories of you being fun, you're not as fun as you say. And he said, hey, we're going to be, well, as soon as your dad figures out where you are, then you can leave. But until then, let's play some games. He has his little visor and his little card says, like, do you have any fives or something? And that's that issue. So we find out who Clark Kent is. We find out why Mr. Mxyzptlk became Clark, because he needed to hide. And what happens now with Oz, and what is the whole point of Reborn? Where are we going? We got 2 issues left. It's going to be interesting to see what Mxyzptlk plays with this Superman Reborn. That will wrap up this episode of Comic Book Cove. Friends, family, fights, and candy. We pretty much had a little bit of everything this episode.
Yeah, and just like candy, we want more.
I'm Tom Morris.
I'm Josh Holderbaum.
And we'll see you next episode of Comic Book Cove.